Welcome to Silmarillion Chat number 5, where I talk about, my thoughts about sections of the Silmarillion in conjunction with the reading group I'm going through this with. Doing today chapters 9 to 12 of the Quenta Silmarillion, which is the main bit of the Silmarillion, which was a posthumous collection of writings chiefly about the prehistory of Lord of the Rings. The chapters are called, I'll say them now, chapter 9 is of the flight of the Noldor, 10 of the Sindar, 11 of the sun and the moon and the hiding of Valinor, and 12 of men. Two of these are long chapters. Well, one is a long chapter by the standards we've had so far. It's 13 pages, which is about the longest chapter I think we've had so far in the Quenta. That's the flight of the Noldor. Then there's an 8-page chapter, which is about average of the Sindar, and then a 5 and a 3-page chapter. So it kind of tails off in this particular selection to shorter chapters. But of the flight of the Noldor, two of them I should say, of the sun and moon and the hiding of Valinor and of men are kind of fairly prospective. They're fairly summary of things that either are summing up what has happened, just so you know why things are the way they are, or what's going to happen. The other two, the flight of the Noldor and of the Sindar, which are about the two main groups of elves we deal with in the whole of Middle Earth. There's a third group you sometimes deal with, Sylvan elves of different kinds, but they are not usually, you don't get virtually any named characters out of that group, just a couple over time. And the Noldor, remember, they are the kind of crafty elves, the second kindred of crafty elves. The Sindar are the members of the third kindred who stayed behind in Middle-earth looking for their king after he walked into a magical wood and fell in love with basically an angel, a Maya, Melian. So they are the kind of most advanced and most enlightened, in the sense, particularly the Noldor have been to the land of the blessed. And so here, as I've talked about in previous weeks, as we talked about in the group, we've already decisively moved from the Valar, the angels / gods, being the main characters, which they are in the first two big sections, and then somewhat in the first few chapters of the Quenta, to elves being the main characters. We also get the first mention of the lesser group in terms of main characters but very, very important in the Quenta. We get of men. Very, very brief summary, but given that a few men, particularly a few humans, are going to be exceptionally important. Now, I'm going to get to that when we get there in this chat. But because of that, it's an interesting section, and they will be the main characters one way or another of particularly the Lord of the Rings, but also if you see hobbits as humans biologically, also the Hobbit. There's some question about exactly what's going on there. The Flight of the Noldor is my favourite chapter so far, pretty much. Of this reread at least, there's been some great moments. It is basically the chapter where it is not where Feanor's journey or development ends, but it is really the peak of Feanor being the main character, which he's been the main, fundamentally the main elf character for the last several chapters. We know he's very important from chapter 5, one of the princes of the Adalier. Number 6 is of Feanor and the unchaining of Melkor, and of 7 is of the Silmarils and the unrest of the Noldor, which is to do with Feanor making the Silmarils and things around how they feel about Melkor and how they feel about the Valar, and then the darkening of Valinor heavily implicates Feanor as well. So now we have really the denouement of what's happened in the last 4 chapters, not the kind of not the falling action. Ironically, the falling action comes in a very dramatic chapter of the Return of the Noldor, which is chapter 13. But the denouement of this main section of, there's this unrest in Eden, and it is an Edenic place, and I think that came up in our conversation on the Discord, that you're talking about a fall. You're talking about a paradisical place, Aman, Tirion upon Tuna, all these wonderful places near where the gods live, and then you have discord, there, and now we have in the flight of the Noldor what that leads to, a fall, and it is such a fall. It's a fall that nonetheless is very Tolkienian in that it is what he would call a eucatastrophe, in a way a disaster that leads to greater good or something. So we've had Melkor and Ungoliant. Ungoliant has poisoned the 2 trees that cast light, so there's only the stars of Varda, which of course Melkor is terrified of, and the creatures of Melkor will be terrified of, so late as Lord of the Rings, with the Elbereth song, Varda also being known as Elbereth. So they're all gathered in the Ring of Doom, the Valar sat in shadow. The stars are shining, Manwë's wind drives away the vapours of death, rolls back the shadows of the sea, and Yavanna, goddess or Valar of plants, creator of the Ents, she can see the trees, and everyone's lamenting, and she says, this is Yavanna, that the light of the trees has passed away, lives now only in the Silmarils of Feanor. Foresighted was he. Even for those who are mightiest under Ilúvatar, there is some work they may accomplish once and once only. And he says, she says, this is like me for the trees, but if we get the Silmarils, we might be able to save them. And Manwë says, will you let Yavanna take the Silmarils and break them? And Feanor is pressed by the god of war, Tulkas. Speak, O Noldor, yea or nay? Aule says, be not hasty, he's the craft god. We ask a greater thing than thou knowest, let him have peace yet a while. There's actually something quite touching there, isn't there, about Aule interceding for Feanor. He understands what is being asked of someone who has created a work of genius. And Feanor says, basically, he says, look, if you take them, I'll be heartbroken. I can't do it again. I shall break my heart. I shall be slain first of all the Eldar in Aman. We're told that he is not the first to be slain. And Feanor broods a bit more, and then he believes Melkor's words about the other Valar. He says, is he not Valar as they are? And does he not understand their hearts? Yea, a thief shall reveal thieves. And he says, look, I'm not going to do this. If you constrain me, I'll know you really are like Melkor. And Mandos says, thou hast spoken. Nienna, goddess of grief, I guess, her tears wash away the defilements of Ungoliant as she grieves in bitterness of the world and the marring of Arda. Messengers come, and this is, you see Feanor has made a big decision where he cannot give up this thing he's created. He didn't put the light of the Silmarils was not his, it was from the trees, it was from Yavanna, ultimately from Eru, God, but he can't give that up because it's too precious to him, and he's believed a lie about the Valar. He kind of thinks this just proves Melkor, who I'd kind of disbelieved, but maybe he was right, really. And the Noldor from Formenos come, which was the court of exile of Feanor, his sons, and his father Finwë, who had gone with him. And it turns out that Melkor came, he's stolen everything, including the Silmarils, and worst of all, he has slain Finwë, High King of the Noldor, Feanor's father, because Finwë refused to flee. Finwë stood and died to protect his home. And this is where Feanor lifts up his hand before Manwë. He curses Melkor, names him Morgoth, the black foe of the world, and by that name only was he known to the Eldar ever after. And he cursed also the sons of Manwë. He thinks he could stop it because his father was dearer to him than the light of Valinor or the peerless works of his hands, and who among sons of elves and men have held their fathers of greater worth. Feanor is a heroic figure in every good and bad way, and we chiefly see the bad ways in this situation as he progressively rebels. But there is this great human emotion. He lost his mother when, basically, after he was born. She faded away, and now his father, who was everything to him, more than the Silmarils, which he has refused to give to the gods. We're talking about incredibly high value. Morgoth has slain him. And many there grieve for the anguish of Feanor, but his loss was not his alone. Yavanna wept by the mound because they can't heal the trees anymore. They perceive Melkor had gone away, the Silmarillions had gone away, and all one it may seem whether Feanor had said yea or nay to Yavanna. Yet had he said yea at the first, before the tidings came from Formenos, it may be that his after deeds would have been other than they were. But now the doom of the Noldor drew near. And there's a really important thing there that in terms of genre, not in terms of theme, but in terms of genre, this is myth and saga. You're constantly told what's going to happen. The point here is not generally, oh man, there are some surprises and some fun things, but you're not meant to be surprised. It's not like, wow, I wonder what will happen in the last chapter of this. Especially in the format that Christopher Tolkien released it, but also because it's so close to the late 50s version of the Quenta, a version that Tolkien knew, if it was published, would come after publication order Lord of the Rings. So this is stuff where you're learning, yes, it's stuff he's been writing by the 50s for 40 years, and it was his first thought, but it's something where it's not a novel. It's prose, but it's not a novel. Not all prose fiction is novels, are novels, you know. Short stories are not novels, for instance, are they? Prose poems are not novels. And here the saga is not a novel because it has expectations and forms. And here a big part of the form is that you're looking forward to things that must happen. And there is a constant sense in the Nordic saga of doom. It's interesting to see there, one, you can just say it's psychological. If Feanor had already agreed to give the Silmarils, he would not have acted as he did. But there's also a way in which you can see a destiny, you know, a doom upon them because of, in this context, that Feanor's decision, irrespective of his power or potentiality to do it, changes so much. It really marks out the Noldor who will follow him as those who, you know, there's a way in which they have not accepted the wisdom of the gods. Morgoth falls out with Ungoliant. Ungoliant runs away. I mean, there's an interesting thing that Morgoth is rescued by Balrogs, who, remember, they are the oldest of the rebels, those spirits of flame who had sided with Melkor in the rebellion after the music, or in the music. And so we get stuff here that Ungoliant flees off. She has lots of spider-like children. This leads to Shelob. She's not terribly relevant from now. She's mentioned once more, I think, in a later chapter, pretty much, or maybe once or twice. Morgoth has them, and he recovers his fortress of Angband, because the great fortress of Tumno was destroyed, but Angband, the lesser fortress, is left behind, and he raises up a new fortress there. The Noldor go back to their own city in Tirion, and they mourn the loss. So we switch scenes. We now know what's happened to Melkor and Morgoth. Now only ever reading Morgoth in the book. Feanor turns up and he calls everyone to the High Court of the King. And he says, why should we serve the jealous Valar? He claims the kingship of the Noldor because he's the eldest son of Finwë. He scorns the Valar. He says, rebel against the Valar, and since they don't deserve our service, aren't they and Morgoth the same sort of thing? How can we trust them if Morgoth is untrustworthy? I'm not the only valiant in this valiant people. Have you not all lost your king? What else have you not lost? Cooped here in a narrow land between the mountains and the sea. And he says, let's go back to Middle-earth. We remember, or many of you remember, this good old place. Let's go there. Let's return to this place of beauty where a free people might walk, he says. Long he spoke, he urges them, and he calls them on. Fair shall the end be, he cried, though long and hard shall be the road. Say farewell to bondage, but say farewell also to ease. Say farewell to the weak. Say farewell to your treasures. More still shall we make. Journey light, but bring with you your swords, for we will go further than Orome, endure longer than Tulkas. We will never turn back from pursuit. After Morgoth to the ends of the earth. War shall he have, and hatred undying. But when we have conquered and have regained the Silmarils, then we and we alone shall be lords of the unsullied light, and masters of the bliss and the beauty of Arda. No other race shall oust us. Then Feanor swore, and that relates to the suspicion that men, who Melkor has spoken about, might overthrow the elves. And Feanor swears a terrible oath. His 7 sons leap straight up, red as blood on their drawn swords. They swore an oath which none shall break, and none should take by the name even of Ilúvatar, calling the everlasting dark upon them if they kept it not. And Manwë they named in witness, and Varda, and the hallowed mountain of Taniquetil, vowing to pursue with vengeance and hatred to the ends of the world Valar, demon, elf, or man as yet unborn, or any creature, great or small, good or evil, that time should bring forth unto the end of days, whoso should hold or take or keep a Silmaril from their possession. This is wonderful prose. This is Tolkien at his best, and this is incredibly important for what's going forward. We now have an oath that most relevantly binds the sons of Feanor to pursue the Silmarils to the bitter end, against all. Many quail to hear these dread words. Fingolfin and Turgon his sons spoke against Feanor. Orodreth alone of... but Finarfin spoke softly. This is the third brother of the three sons. There's Feanor, Fingolfin, Finarfin. Finarfin tries to calm them down. Orodreth of his sons speaks in a like manner. Finrod, another of his sons, sides with Turgon, son of Fingolfin, saying, no, these guys are mad. So there's these kind of three parties. Great debate. Galadriel, the only woman of the Noldor to stand the day tall and valiant among the contending princes, was eager to be gone. No oaths she swore, but the words of Feanor concerning Middle-earth had kindled in her heart, and she yearned to see wide unguarded lands and to rule there a realm of her own will. Of like mind with Galadriel was Fingon, Fingolfin's son, being moved also by Feanor's words, though he loved him little. And with Fingon stood as they ever did, Angrod and Egnor, sons of Finarfin. But these held their peace and spoke not against their fellows. You actually have four factions. You have a peace faction, you have a let's go and kill everyone faction, ignore the Valar. You have the sort of, if you like, the loyalist faction, Fingolfin and Turgon and Finrod, who are like, this is madness. And then you have those who just want to go and explore. They don't really agree with the stuff about the Valar, but they love the idea of exploring and seeing what there is to see. And Feanor prevails. Finarfin tries to slow them down, but everyone wants to go because it's been decided. They couldn't plan properly, and Feanor drove them on thinking people would slow down, but there's no attempt by the Valar to restrain them. They'd come of their own free will. They can leave of their own free will. The Valar are aggrieved, but they don't want to hold them captive, as they've been accused of. Now, he had brought the assembly in a mind to depart. Not everyone wanted Feanor. Greater love was given to Fingolfin and his household, and the most part of the dwellers in Tirion refused to renounce them. And so there's two hosts. This is not necessarily directly Feanor's fault. At this point, this is, you could trace it back to him, but this is a separate problem where, because of Feanor's clash with Fingolfin, and the argument over, basically about how matters were going in Tirion, Feanor is exiled. And so you obviously have those who see Fingolfin, who is not of the same mother, so you have a classic trope there of brotherly dissension. Fingolfin is seen as the true heir by those people, even if they wouldn't put it that way. Finarfin goes with Fingolfin because, Finarfin and Fingolfin don't really want to go. They are urged, but he would not be sundered from his people that were eager to go, nor leave them to the rash counsels of Feanor, nor did he forget his words before the throne of Manwë, which were to promise to follow Feanor and to submit to him. So though Fingolfin leads a host, including that of his brother Finarfin, he understands he has duties both to the people and to Feanor. And there's an attitude of kingship discussion here, isn't there? That Feanor has the great heroic instinct of Achilles, rage, that he is outraged by a great insult against him. He rises to his greatest might in pursuit of that. There is something truly impressive in a way that's often disturbing or monstrous, but very impressive, and which is not necessarily what you expect from Tolkien. There's a lot of subtlety. We've talked about this a little bit already, but lots of subtlety in the presentation of characters and the stories in the Silmarillion. But Fingolfin is much more the righteous, just king. He is not Achilles. He's Hector, actually, if you want to make the comparison. He goes to protect his people, and because he swore a vow. And he doesn't want to break a vow. And the vow was not a crazy vow you shouldn't make, as we've heard about Feanor's vow over the Silmarils, which his sons make with him. It's not crazy like that. Instead, it's a reasonable vow. I am sorry for having lost my temper with you, brother. You're my elder brother, you're the heir to our father, and I will follow you. That's a reasonable, pious vow. it displays pietas. And so Finnegan goes along too, not wanting to, cause dissension, knowing they should honour their elder brother, who really is the king of the Noldor. One tithe refused to take the road, so 10%. Some for the love of Valar, some for the love of Tyrion, none for fear of peril, by the way. So 90% of the Noldor will go at this point. A single messenger comes from Manwë, though. Against the folly of Feanor shall be set my counsel only. Go not forth, for the hour is evil when your road leads to sorrow you do not foresee. No aid will the Valar lend you in your quest, but neither will they hinder you, for this ye shall know. As ye came hither freely, freely shall you depart. But thou, Feanor, Finwë's son, by thine own oath art exiled. The lies of Melkor thou shalt unlearn in bitterness. Valar he is, thou sayest, thou hast sworn in vain, for none of the Valar canst thou overcome, now or ever within the halls of Ea. Not though Eru, whom thou namest, had made thee thrice greater than thou art. So the counsel is, we don't want to hold you prisoner, we want you to stay, this will be a bitter road. Feanor, you've exiled yourself because of your vow, but it's foolish because you can't do what you said you were doing. But Feanor laughed and spoke not to the herald but to the Noldor, saying, So, then will this valiant people send forth the heir of their king alone into banishment with his sons only and return to their bondage. But if any will come with me, I say to them, is sorrow foreboded to you? But in Aman we have seen it. In Aman we have come through bliss to woe. The other now we shall try, through sorrow to find joy or freedom at the least. Then turning to the herald, he cried, Say this to Manwë Sulamo, High King of Arda. If Feanor cannot overthrow Morgoth, at least he delays not to assail him, and sits not idle in grief. And it may be that Eru has set in me a fire greater than thou knowest. Such hurt at the least will I do to the foe of Valar, that even the mighty in the ring of doom shall wonder to hear it. Yea, in the end they shall follow me. Farewell. In that hour the voice of Feanor grew so great and so potent that even the herald of the Valar bowed before him as one full answered, and departed, and the Noldor were overruled. That's a really this is Feanor's high point, really, the point at which, and that we're going to see moral decline. But the point is that here he has stood up and he has said that he refuses to be cowed by risk. He has seen his father and his mother die. He has seen beauty destroyed, and the Valar haven't been able to stop it, and they won't go after Morgoth. We hear why later, somewhat, but the point is that they won't go after Morgoth, and he will. And one day they will have to follow him. This is prophecy. And so I guess the herald may be Eonwy, who is the herald of Manwë in other situations. The Maiar, who is taking the message, I guess, is full answered. He doesn't feel like this is unreasonable in the sense, it's not unreasonable in the sense that it's incomplete or ridiculous or irrational, even in the sense of mad. It's wrong. Feanor is objectively wrong, but the heroic spirit is undeniable, and so there has to be some sort of, essentially an acceptance of it, not a grieving perhaps, but an acceptance. Feanor goes forth with the Noldor, and he goes down to the Teleri, the Sea Elves, who are in this context Sea Elves, much like their Sindar, many of their Sindar cousins, led by Círdan, the shipwright in Middle Earth. But they don't want to help him. They were grieved indeed that their kinsfolk were going, but would rather dissuade them. I'd say actually that the reason this partly happens is because they realise it's going to be really difficult to go on a long march to the far north, basically to the North Pole, and they're like, well, maybe we need to go back and get ships. So you get this ridiculous situation where they obviously haven't planned this well enough. You can already see it coming apart. They have to march back, and the Teleri don't care. They have no other lord than Olwë, Prince of Alqualondë, and he had never lent ear to Morgoth nor welcomed him to his land. He trusted still that Ulmo and the other great among the Valar would redress the hurts of Morgoth, and that the night would pass yet to a new dawn. Feanor sees this as betrayal, a renouncing of friendship. He says this to Olwë. Olwë says, and yeah, we helped you build everything here. Olwë says, we renounce no friendship, but it may be the part of a friend to rebuke a friend's folly, profoundly Gandalf-like. And when the Noldor welcomed us and gave aid, otherwise then you spoke, in the land of a man we were to dwell forever, as brothers whose houses stand side by side. But as for our white ships, those you gave us not. We learned not that craft from the Noldor, but from the lords of the sea. Feanor is now basically the overreaching. Here we actually move, in a way, there's another genre that comes up here is Renaissance tragedy, particularly dramatic tragedy. You get Shakespearean sections of speech, but you also get a theme particularly with Feanor, of the Marlovian overreacher. He sees the prize and goes and topples. And here he's just beginning to talk rubbish. And Feanor returns to his host, and he decides he's going to begin to man the ships, even though he's not been given permission. The Teleri try to stop him, and the kinslaying begins. You could say, and I think it's actually important to say, that we do not see Feanor decide to go and kill the Teleri. The idea is instead they will simply take the ships forcibly, but the assumption is not we'll kill anyone, but because the Teleri, who don't have very good weapons, will defend their swan ships, which are so precious to them. Feanor obviously thinks this won't be a big issue, and it turns into a horrendous battle between the host of Feanor and the Teleri, backed up eventually by Fingon and the host of Fingolfin, who don't realise what's going on. They see their friends being attacked, their brethren, so they join. Some thought indeed the Teleri had sought to waylay the march to Noldor at the bidding of the Valar, which would be at some level a real betrayal, wouldn't it? Because it would be a counterattack, an attempt to enslave the Noldor. A great part of their mariners were wickedly slain. The Noldor were fierce and desperate, and the Teleri had less strength. Of the kinslaying at Alqualonde, more is told in that lament, which is named Noldorlante, the fall of the Noldor, that Maglor made ere he was lost. Maglor, Feanor's son, we see an interesting, again, a perspective thing that Maglor, obviously this grieves him. The Noldor escape, and they see a dark figure as they come north. It is in fact, some say it was Mandos himself. They heard a loud voice, solemn and terrible, that bade them stand and give ear. And they hear the curse and prophecy, the prophecy of the north, the doom of the Noldor. Tears unnumbered ye shall shed, that's an important phrase. And the Valar will fence Valinor against you and shut you out, so that not even the echo of your lamentation shall pass over the mountains. On the house of Feanor the wrath of the Valar lieth from the west unto the uttermost east, and upon all them that will follow him, them it shall be laid also. Their oath shall drive them, and yet betray them, and ever snatch away the very treasures they have sworn to pursue. To evil end shall all things turn that begin well, and by treason of kin unto kin, and the fear of treason shall this come to pass. The dispossessed shall they be forever. You've spilled the blood of your kindred unrighteously, and have stained the land of a man. So this is the exile from Eden. What was happening before was rebellion, but there's an interesting thing where apart from Feanor, and Feanor was seen as self-exiling, there's no exile or fall. This is the fall of the Noldor, the kinslaying, the Cain and Abel moment. For though Eru appointed you to die not in Ea, no sickness may assail you, yet slain you may be, and slain ye shall be, by weapons and tormenting grief, and your houseless spirits shall come then to Mandos. There long shall ye abide and yearn for your bodies, and find little pity, though all you whom ye have slain should entreat for you. And those that endure in Middle-earth and come not to Mandos shall grow weary of the world as with a great burden, and shall wane, and become as shadows of regret before the younger race that cometh after. The Valar have spoken. That, of course, applies to Galadriel. When you think about all the way forward, what is it? 6,500 years or something in the future, Galadriel is this character who has grieved long and finally repents of it. Feanor hardens his heart and says, we've sworn and not lightly. This oath we will keep. We are threatened with many evils and treason not least, but one thing is not said, that we shall suffer from cowardice, from cravens, or the fear of cravens. Therefore I say that we'll go on, at this doom I add. The deeds that we shall do shall be the matter of song until the last days of ardour. Finarfin forsook the march, turned back, being filled with grief and with bitterness against the house of Feanor because of his kinship with Olwe of Aqualonde. His sons were not with him, they would not forsake the sons of Fingolfin. And all Fingolfin's folk went forward still, feeling the constraint of their kinship and the will of Feanor, and fearing to face the doom of the Valar, since not all had been guiltless of the kinslaying at Alqualonde. Moreover, Fingon and Turgon were bold and fiery of heart, loath to abandon any task to which they had put their hands until the bitter end, if bitter it must be. So you see that the host of Fingolfin is tied by the vow of Fingolfin, by the convincing arguments of Feanor, convincing at one level, because Feanor is again truly heroic here. There is this thing where he is wrong, but there is still a degree of glory in his wrongness. And they're also, the host of Fingolfin is implicated. Finarfin and his sons are not. Finarfin goes back, he becomes the king of the tithe, remaining at Tirion upon Tuna. Many of his people went with him. So some Noldor never rebel, and some are allowed to return immediately. Even though the doom has been put over them, this is an interesting thing. The doom is over them, but they can still repent. As a few people, I think Clarkey particularly emphasised in our discussion, at any point it seems really, when you think about it, Feanor could have just turned round and said sorry. And even though these great dooms are upon him, they would have been released. As one day they will be released of Galadriel when she goes home, as every elf who goes west from the Second Age onwards is allowed to do. The Noldor come to the north. Feanor halts, and they're beginning to suffer anguish from the cold, the clinging mists. Many people are repenting. Feanor takes counsel with his sons, and they have to go either by the straits over the Helcaraxe, over land bridge and glaciers and whatever, or by ship. The ships are too few, the straits are horrible, so they take the ships, and they go over. They leave Fingolfin behind, so they can get their people over. They land, and then Maethros, and Maethros is one of my favourite characters in many ways, the eldest of his sons. And on a time, the friend of Fingon, ere Morgoth's lies came between them, spoke to Feanor, saying, "Now what ships and rowers will you spare to return, and whom shall they bear hither first? Fingon the valiant?" And now we see the point to which Feanor has come. He sees Fingolfin and his host as traitors, and he burns the ships. The swan ships of Alqualonde are burnt at the Firth of Drengist. This was the first fruits of the kinslaying in the Dome on the Noldor, and the host of Fingolfin see it from afar. But Fingolfin desired now as never before to come by some way to Middle-earth and meet Feanor again. And so his people go across, and many die. They're led by Fingolfin and his sons, and by Finrod and Galadriel. They dared to pass into the bitterest north. Elenwe, the wife of Turgon, was lost, and many others perished also. Small love for Feanor or his sons had those that marched at last behind him and blew their trumpets in Middle-earth at the first rising of the moon. We'll go a bit quicker now, given we're already really at time. But it's a vital chapter because it is really the dramatic crux. Not the theft of the Silmarils, which is tragic, not even the poisoning of the trees, which is tragic. And they're connected in it. You then get to the point where you kind of need the Silmarils back if you're going to fix the trees, and this great beauty of the noontide of Ea, of Aman, of Valinor. But here we have the thing that starts the rest of the story, that the Noldor refuse to accept whatever plan the Valar have. They decide instead that they will reach the highest point of heroism and go and take them back, get the Silmarils back. And there are different motivations in this. You know, we hear, as I said, well, though you do see some of those who go presumably are sort of the peace party. Most of those who go were happy to go, either because they're adventurers or because they wanted to avenge themselves against Morgoth, or they wanted to see Middle-earth, or because they wanted to keep an oath, or because, in Feanor's case, he wanted to possess the gems, the jewels, the light that was his, he thought, and the world that was his that had been taken from him and his people, and to stop men overthrowing them. So you have all these complex, some quite unpleasant and revolting motivations, and some more understandable. You then switch to the Sindar, and we hear very importantly, though Middle-earth lay for the most part in the sleep of Yavanna, in Beleriand under the power of Melian there was life and joy, and the bright stars shone as silver fire, and there in the forest of Neldoreth Luthien was born, and the white flowers of Nifredel came forth to greet her as stars of the earth. Luthien, the only child of Thingol, the one of the two kings of the Teleri, the one who is lost in a magic wood, and his people stay behind and they never cross to Valinor in the light of the trees, but he marries an angel, a Maiar called Melian, and they create this beautiful realm. We now hear also of the dwarves coming over, the Khazad themselves they named, but the Sindar called them Norgrim, the stunted people, and Gonhirim, masters of stone. Far to the east were the most ancient dwellings of the Naugrim. Well, Khazad Dûm particularly, but they made 2 cities in the Blue Mountains, the Ered Luin, which is the coast of Middle Earth in the Third Age. So if you look in your Lord of the Rings map, you'll see it, the Ered Luin, and they call them Galbil Gathol and Tumun Zahar, which are called Belagost and Nogrod by the elves. Belagost, the Mickelberg, and Nogrod, the Hollowbold. The choice of names, of course, though Rivendell is of the same type, this choice of Sindarin names is meant to call us not specifically to the Rohirrim, but to this tradition of the North. The greatest of all the mansions we're here is Khazad Dûm, the Dwaradelf, Hathodrond in the Elven tongue, afterwards called Moria, but they don't know about that now. And the Naugrim come forth into Middle Earth, and the elves had thought they were the only living things that spoke. They find the dwarves a bit weird, but the dwarves want to learn. They are more willing to learn Elven tongue than to share their own. We hear elsewhere, of course, that the Dwarven tongue seems to be semi-sacred, that to share parts of it is to share, part of your soul. A few of the Eldar over went to Nogros and Belagos, save Aol of Nan Elmoth and Maeglin his son. But the dwarves came often, and they became friends, somewhat with King Thingol, though they afterward gave their friendship more readily to the Noldor, because of their love and reverence of Aule, and the gems of the Noldor they praised above all other wealth. We know Feanor has pioneered gem cutting, basically. So you have that, you have this setup where dwarves enter. They've been allowed to wake, now the elves have woken, and they come and they befriend Thingol. And the big thing actually is that they help Thingol create his great fortress city in the heart of Doriath, Menegroth, the Thousand Caves, because they they make a deal, and Melian says you need to have a good safe place. The elves also had their part in their labour, and they wrought out the visions along with the dwarves of the visions of Melian, images of the wonder and beauty of Valinor beyond the sea. This is a really beautiful section, where and this is still while Melkor and Morgoth is imprisoned. It turns out not everything has been rooted out, and things begin to come over the mountains, even while Melkor is still imprisoned. But Thingol takes thoughts for arms, and the Norgrim smith them for him, and a warlike race of old were all the Norgrim, and they would fight fiercely against whomsoever aggrieved them, servants of Melkor, or Eldar, or Avari, or wild beasts, or not seldom their own kin. The Sindar learn it of them, and so they're well armed, and this proves good for them. We then hear but this is really a collection of stories about kind of round Thingol. They have Luthien. Then they meet the Norgrim. They build Menegroth. Now we hear about the Green Elves coming over. One section of the Host of Aldway had stopped by the Misty Mountains and the Gladden Fields, the Anduin River Valley. Now they've come over for various reasons, and a section under Denethor comes and lives in a land of rivers in his realm. They are then Nandor, or what are they? Lykendi, I think they're called. They're forest elves. They're sylvan elves. So there's a real ethnic mix, isn't there? And it's intentional. Like, this is part of this big thing in Tolkien about actual migrations and actual linguistic development. Hence why you have stuff about the change of the Sindarin language from its original Quenya, the same as the Noldor speak, to this different thing, and from a Finnish language to a Welsh language of all things. Then this ends basically with Melkor returns, everything happens, there's all this chaos, there's a great battle. They do defeat, the elves do defeat them. An army comes in and assails King Thingol, and they pour down either side of Doriath, and they cut him off from Círdan, the other great lord of the Grey Elves, who's at the coast, and he calls upon Denethor, the lord of the Green Elves, and they fight the first battle in the Wars of Beleriand. There are 5 great battles, and really these should be thought of as campaigns as much as anything, because there are many small battles and they are not counted amongst the battles. The eastern host was destroyed, albeit at great cost, as Denethor, the king of the Nandor here, is killed, and this essentially means that the Lykendi, the Green Elves, are some go and merge with Thingol, but the rest become a reclusive people down south in Beleriand. And nonetheless, Círdan has lost in the west and is driven back to his strongholds, and so Thingol has to depend on the girdle of Melian and hide behind the magic to protect his people. But no one, neither Morgoth nor Melian, had predicted this, that Feanor has come over the sea, burned the ships at Loscar. We then get 2 short chapters, which I can sum up my thoughts on quickly, and some of the thoughts stolen from other people. But The Sun and the Moon and the Hiding of Valinor is a myth chapter. It's explaining why things are like they are now, because the stars are there, Valar put them there, but there's no light from the 2 trees. Obviously in Middle-earth there's only ever been stars, but now we get the sun and the moon. The sun, and these are fruits. One is a fruit. Well, first actually you do hear there an interesting point. The Manwë thinks, okay, well, actually the Noldor should do deeds to live in song forever. That was the last word of Feanor and the last glorious word of his. So shall it be, dear bought those songs shall be accounted, for the price could be no other. Thus even as Eri spoke to us, shall beauty not be before conceived be brought unto Ea, and evil yet be good to have been. But Mandos said, and yet remain evil, to me shall Feanor come soon. Again, the saga doom. Great Manwë and Mandos are brothers. They're brothers, of course, and though they don't have deep characterization in one sense, they do in another. That you're very clear that Manwë constantly looks for hope. He trusts people. He believes Melkor could be repentant. He doesn't want to constrain Feanor. He sees that good will come out of this evil. Mandos is a bit more realistic, having a very long view of things, and holds his silence a lot because no one wants to hear it. But he's clear here, the deed itself is still evil. Good will come out of it, and the good will be the defeat of Morgoth eventually, basically. And the enlightenment of men, the second kindred. But the point is that Feanor shouldn't have done that. Eru and the Valar could have done things another way. This will be the way they do happen, and that's a redemption of some of these things, but it doesn't make the original deed good. But yeah, they make these lights out of a single flower from Telperion and a single fruit from Lorelin, the moon and the sun. And Maiar drives these around. There's some interesting stuff. I think so. Clarkey possibly it was again pointed out that you have here like an interesting inversion, that the sun is a female goddess and the moon is a male god. You get some interesting explanations of why there are different years for them, different calendars for them, for their relationship, for eclipses, for things like that, why they chase themselves around, why they rest, etc. Very much kind of mythopoeic stuff. One thing I thought was interesting is the idea that it's named Varsha. Who is it that drives that one? Maybe I won't be able to find it. Arian is the driver of the sun. The fact that she is a fire spirit, she's actually a Balrog, but she's not a Balrog. She didn't fall to Melkor. So you've got, imagine the spirit, like when you look at the sun, though the sun itself is the fruit of Lorelin, also you're in a sense seeing the greater expression of what good there is in the Balrog, this life-giving heat and warmth. And we also hear about the hiding of Valinor. The enchanted isles are set, the shadowy seas, and hardly might any vessel pass between them. But and then in the twilight a great weariness came upon mariners, and a loathing of the sea. But all that ever set foot upon the islands were there entrapped, and slept until the change of the world. Thus it was then that as Mandos foretold to them in Araman, the blessed realm was shut against the Noldor. And of the many messengers that in after days sailed into the west, none came ever to Valinor, save one only, the mightiest mariner of song. Well, I love this. I love that style. Finally, we get 3 pages of men, and the key things here, I think, is noted. There's some really pretty bits here, some nice lines. In the glory and the beauty of the elves, and in their fateful share, had the offspring of elf and mortal Eärendil and Elwing, and Elrond their child again, the Doom. The fate of men after death maybe is not in the hands of the Valar, nor was all foretold in the music of the Aina. This kind of very, very elliptical and poetic description. But the most important thing, I think, is more or less it becomes clear that one reason, because I think it is here, isn't it, that the Valar search for them, but men fear them, and Morgoth tries to corrupt them. Is it here or is it somewhere else? But basically the point is made, and it's pretty clear this is why. The reason the Valar don't go after Morgoth straight away is because they do not know where the second kindred of Ilúvatar is hiding or is asleep. And they don't want to destroy it and hurt it, so they choose to be patient. Feanor doesn't get this. Feanor sees men as a threat. And imagine if you said, yeah, Feanor, you need to calm down. Chill. Because actually the reason we're not attacking is because we need to protect men. That's exactly proving in Feanor's mind the point, the problem, which is that the Valar are not trustworthy. They don't want to protect the elves. Feanor is as Lawrence put it, I won't quote him, but he's a very difficult individual, isn't he? Feanor is immensely destructive here, but very, very compelling. He's a compelling hero, very Achillean, and he's driving the action forward, and it is creating, the reason, as it were, in world the book exists, the reason that the stories happen as they do is because Feanor refuses to accept a better plan and refuses to accept the insult against him and particularly, most of all, the murder of his father. Which, by the way, that particular point is something which is never seen as thing to criticise, which is interesting, isn't it? As I say, it's pietas, maybe in some ways a warped pietas, because he has a broken and a strange sense of relationship with his father. But it is pietas that leads Feanor to want vengeance for his father, and no one ever questions that, and that is never seen as illegitimate. Anyway, I really enjoyed these sections. I think we've hit one of the great highlights of the book, and there's some others coming, but that's certainly the cause of the length of this one. Yeah, if you've got extra thoughts, share them in the comments, and maybe read along and catch up if you've not read this for a while or not for the first time. Till next time.